All right, welcome. Here we are, week 10. There's another millionaire maker on the horizon. The difference this week is that DraftKings has increased the entry fee to $40 and decreased the total amount of entrants to 71K. Now, last week we saw about 31K on Friday of entrants out of about 93,000. It ended up filling up pretty closely, up to about 70 plus. But this week, it's Saturday, and we still see only about 19K last time I checked. We're at about 20K out of 70K, and it's Saturday. Now, we know the big sharks come in on Saturday and Sunday morning and fill up a ton of lineups. But I really feel like this is the week. We're going to see a really nice overlay in this tournament. It's a little bit more expensive, and this might be your opportunity to put in a few extra entries and go for it. Throwing a couple stones at it isn't going to work. You're going to need multiple lineups and hedge your bets and diversify for injuries and things like that. Looking at last week with about 6 teams on bye, we saw the top scorer hit about 250, which is pretty standard. We saw some super high scores a couple weeks ago. We saw 290, which is just the highest I've seen thus far. But at about 250, you know what you need to average. That's usually about where you have to hit. And what we saw was the winner was stacking with Brady. He just had one stack with Gronkowski, and he had a few receivers that really came up big. He had Mike Evans, DeAndre Hopkins, and Anquan Bolden. And he was able to fill out his roster with some trusted RBs. So each week, regardless of who wins, one thing we see is a common thread. You have to pick up players that didn't do well or are undervalued the week before and take a chance this week. Okay, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4 players, you have to get those players in there. So it's about you picking your battles and identifying those players through matchups, through statistics, and sometimes just your gut feeling. So let's get into my week 10 lineup. Last week I had a few lineups that broke 200. Made some money back. Didn't hit anything big last week, but definitely had some key players that blew up. We had Jeremy Hill. Macklin's always great. Had some Brady stacks. Jordan Reed let me down. He had a ton of targets, but he just didn't show up. And Kenny Britt, while he was still a pretty good value play, he had a touchdown. He disappeared after that first touchdown. And so if you're not getting 20 plus points, you're not going to hit anything big in every position. And the Chiefs just really didn't show up on defense. That was kind of strange. I really thought they would put up some points against New York Jets. But anyway, let's move on to the lineup. I'm going to share that with you. All right, so each week we see Peyton Manning in some winning lineups. Same thing happened last week, and it's going to happen again this week, okay? So he's going up against Oakland, which isn't a terrible defense. They're actually not that bad. They're middle of the road, but Manning coming off a pretty bad loss in New England. Well, you can't say it's a bounce-back game when you put up 400-plus yards and a few touchdowns. I do think he's going to be more efficient. And my main concern in this game is that Denver gets up too big. If they get a defensive touchdown, that could really cut into Manning's numbers. But I'm looking for a minimum of 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. And, well, he's a bit more expensive than Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers is definitely in some lineups this week. You really need to check the injury report on that. Rodgers has 2 starting linemen that look like they're going to be out of the game. Check up on Sitton and Lang. Chicago, while they're a vaunted defense, they can put some pressure on the quarterback, and especially if they're playing against backup linemen. We've seen what happens to Rodgers when he gets pressure. He's not the same quarterback. So really check up on Rodgers for a few $100s more. I like the Manning play. There are going to be other people with this play. Manning's going to be owned, but he always puts up numbers and you have a chance. Okay, I'm stacking him at wide receiver with Emmanuel Sanders, who has been a target machine. He's Wes Welker, but a lot better. And week after week, he is a consistent. Even when Demaryius disappears and Julius Thomas disappears, Sanders gets his, and I think it's going to continue. Manning is not afraid of the check down. He's super accurate, and I think Sanders continues to get his. I'm also stacking him with Demaryius. I feel like 2 of those 3 touchdowns are going to come to these guys. They're both going to go over 100 yards. And right away, that puts me at 3 players within that striking range. And you can't go wrong building up a lineup around these 3 guys. So talking about those players where we have to find some value that haven't been performing well. Frank Gore has been a true disappointment. The Niners look a bit lost, and I'm not quite sure why they've gone away from their run. But it was totally evident in last week on the half-yard line, doing some stupid plays when they should have just pounded it in with Gore and won that game. And Gore's come out this week with some guarantees of making the playoffs. They've got a good matchup. They're in New Orleans, but it's one of the highest over-unders, the second highest over in 50 points this week. And I really think they get back finally to rushing the ball with Gore and establishing that run. They're going to need to slow down New Orleans a bit. And it's the way the Niners win. When Gore rushes well, they win. His average has been down. It's a bit concerning, but we need to take a chance on him. He's the #1 running back. He should get 20 carries this week. Bobby Rainey is one of those plays that's plug and play for me this week, going up against Atlanta. They get destroyed by these fast little running backs, catch passing running backs out of the backfield, and Rainey fits the mold. He's going to get some yards. He's going to put up some points, and he's pretty cheap at $4,400. Super value. He's going to get his. So he has the potential to put up a couple touchdowns to hit that 20-point, 25-point mark, especially with those targets on DraftKings, giving a point per reception. So Torrey Smith is one of those guys that has really come on in the last few weeks. In the last 4 games, he's had 4 touchdowns. Steve Smith has disappeared a bit over this span. And, I mean, if you look at Steve Smith's earlier games, he was a beast, but he did get some really lucky tips on his biggest game against Carolina. He got a huge tip. A few other passes have fallen into his lap. And while he's still a beast, and he's still going to get some targets, it really seems to me like they're trying to establish Torrey Smith again. He had a touchdown last week, dropped another in the end zone, and they've got a really nice matchup this week as well, coming off a loss. I think they're going to get him involved. And DraftKings really has something against Torrey Smith because he is super cheap. I mean, there's no reason he should be as cheap as he is. He's at $3,500. He opens up some space to pick up some big studs. So another one of my value picks that's going to have to go off for me to have a chance is Jared Cook. He's actually come on last week since Brian Quick went down. It was clear that Kenny Britt was the #1, but Jared Cook actually got more targets. He hit about the 50-yard mark, and their offense kind of stalled. But this week they're going up against Arizona, and Arizona is awful against tight ends. This could be the week he finds the end zone. Arizona has a good pass rush, so they're going to be putting pressure on Davis. He's going to have to unload it. Jared Cook is his underneath man, and he's at $3,000. Bottom salary really opens some things up. My flex play, McCoy, lately he's really shown up. He's still pretty cheap for the value he's bringing in. He's getting 20-plus carries. He's $5,600 this week, and he's got an amazing matchup against Carolina, a nice high over-under. They're going to be putting up points, 48. He's on Monday night. Some people don't like Monday night games, so you're going to get some traction there. And while Polk came in last week, still vultured a touchdown, still an opportunity with Sproles catching. McCoy seems to be getting back his touches, and that's what we want. We want touches. At his price range against the matchup, I really like him. My defense are the Arizona Cardinals. Now, I'm going to get up against my tight end. Not something you normally want to do. But, look, if Cardinals are going to give up some points, they're going to give up some points in the passing game, and I'm hoping those points go to Jared Cook. At the same time, the Cardinals put a ton of pressure on the quarterback, and they can get turnovers. And that's what you need. They're at home. You need turnovers. You need a couple touchdowns. So I'm fine if Arizona scores a couple touchdowns on defense and then Jared Cook comes back and scores 2 touchdowns against them. I'll have my points on both sides. It's not something you normally want to do, but in this case, I like the matchup, and I really need to get Jared Cook in there at my value play. So that's it for this week. Good luck. Once again, look for that overlay. Check your injuries. I'll see you at the top of the leaderboards.